No one expected the male lion to react that way. When one brave wildlife vet stepped into the den to help a struggling lioness give birth, he didn't just risk his career, he risked his life. But what happened next was so shocking, so deeply emotional, it changed the way the world views wild animal bonds, forever. The call that changed everything. Dr. Eli Turner had seen his fair share of emergencies. As a seasoned wildlife vet and ranger with over 15 years in the African bush, he treated wounded rhinos, rescued orphan cheetahs, and even stitched up a leopard who got tangled in poachers' snares. But nothing could have prepared him for the call he got that April morning. "Eli, you need to come now. It's Kiera. Something's wrong." The voice on the other end was tense. It belonged to Zaniel, the head tracker at the Zuberi Wildlife Sanctuary in northern Botswana. Kiera was no ordinary lioness. She was the matriarch of the sanctuary's most famous pride, a former rescue herself. Found years ago as a starving cub, she'd grown into a fierce, wise and deeply bonded leader. And she was about to give birth. Eli dropped his coffee mug, grabbed his field pack and ran. A distressed queen. By the time he arrived at the den, it was late afternoon. The air shimmered with heat, the kind that seems to buzz. Zaniel led him down a narrow game trail, her face a mask of concern. "She started labor early this morning," she said. "But something's off. She's weak. And the cubs, they're not coming." The den was tucked beneath the roots of a fallen acacia, half hidden by tall grass. Eli crouched, peering into the cool darkness. He could see Kiera's golden eyes glowing faintly, her flanks rising and falling in labored, uneven breaths. Blood was smeared across her hind legs. Her paws flexed against the dirt in pain. But it wasn't just Kiera he was worried about. Just beyond the den, sitting like a sentry in the brush, was Kovu, the male. Kovu wasn't Kiera's mate by blood. He had joined the pride just 2 years ago, a rogue lion, emaciated and wounded, who Kiera had somehow accepted. Since then he'd become her shadow. He was fiercely protective, especially now. His golden mane bristled when he saw Eli approach, and his massive body tensed with every move. Eli had just hours. He had to get close. He had to go inside. And Kovu wasn't going to let that happen easily. A gamble with death. "I need you to cover me," Eli said, voice low. He turned to Zaniel, who already had her tranquilizer rifle ready. "If he charges, shoot. Don't hesitate." Zaniel's jaw tightened. She nodded. Eli had done dangerous procedures before, but crawling into a lioness's birthing den with an unpredictable male lion looming just feet away? That was suicidal. Still, he dropped to his belly, scooted forward, and whispered softly to Kiera. "It's okay, girl. I'm here now." He could hear the soft whimpers of cubs still inside her womb. One paw moved slightly as if recognizing his voice. Eli reached into his pack, pulling out gloves, lubricant, and the tools he might need for a field delivery. He'd studied feline obstetrics but never had to do this in the wild, in a den with a male lion watching his every move. Then it happened. A low growl rumbled outside. Leaves rustled. Kovu stood up. Zaniel's finger tightened on the trigger, heart hammering. But instead of charging, Kovu sat down. Still. Silent. Watching. Life and death in the dirt. Inside the den, Eli worked quickly. He found the first cub. It was lodged sideways. If he didn't reposition it, it would die. Worse, it could take Kiera with it. "She's not contracting anymore," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Come on, mama, just a little more." Kiera let out a guttural, breathy moan, then stilled. Eli massaged her abdomen, carefully rotated the cub inside her. Minutes passed. Then, finally, a tiny, wet, motionless body slipped out into his gloved hands. No breath. Eli's heart sank. He rubbed the cub vigorously, clearing mucus from its nose, pumping its tiny chest with his fingertips. "Don't you die on me," he whispered. Then a gasp. The cub jerked. A small cry pierced the stillness. Eli exhaled shakily. One down. Another contraction. Then another. He helped deliver 3 more cubs, all weak but breathing. The final one, the runt, was barely alive. Kiera gave a final heave, then collapsed, exhausted. Eli laid the cubs close to her belly and backed out slowly, sweat pouring down his neck, hands shaking. The moment that shook the world. Eli stood up, his clothes stained with blood and afterbirth, breath catching in his throat. He turned to Zaniel, about to speak. But Kovu had moved. The massive lion was no longer watching from the brush. He was standing just feet away, his amber eyes fixed on Eli. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then Kovu did something no one expected. He walked past Eli. And into the den. Eli turned slowly, watching in stunned silence as the great lion ducked into the narrow opening. Inside, Kiera didn't growl. She didn't tense. She merely flicked her tail once, an acknowledgement. Moments later, Kovu emerged, carrying the weakest cub in his jaws. He padded a few steps into the sun, set the tiny cub down in the grass, and began licking it gently, cleaning its face and ears like a mother would. Zanil gasped. "I've never seen a male do that," she whispered. Neither had Eli. This wasn't just protection. This wasn't instinct. This was love. The video that went viral. Unbeknownst to Eli, Zanil had turned on her body camera during the procedure. She caught it all, the tense crawl into the den, the births, and most incredibly, Kovu cradling the runt cub like a fragile treasure. When the footage was shared with the sanctuary's media team, they debated releasing it. Wild lions weren't supposed to behave like this. But they decided to take the risk. The video was posted under one title: The Lion Who Became a Father. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. The world watched in awe as a male lion, a creature so often misunderstood as cold, territorial, and violent, gently groomed his newborn cub, eyes soft, tail flicking like a lullaby. Comments flooded in. "This made me cry. He's not just a lion. He's a father. This changed how I see animals forever." But that was only the beginning. What the world didn't know, what even Eli didn't know, was that Kovu's story wasn't done yet. In the days that followed, something would happen that would shake the sanctuary to its core. A tragedy. A betrayal. A fight for survival that would test the strength of a father's love. And Kovu would have to make a decision that no wild lion had ever made before. One that would make headlines. One that would defy nature itself. The world had fallen in love with the image of Kovu cradling his fragile cub, but just days later, that love would be tested in a way no one could have foreseen. What started as a miracle would soon spiral into a fight for survival, and Kovu would be forced to choose between nature and nurture. What he did next stunned even the most seasoned animal experts. The days after the miracle. The first 48 hours after birth are critical for any lion cub, especially those born in the wild. Weak immune systems, exposure to predators, and dehydration are constant threats. But in Kiera's den, something miraculous was happening. Kovu didn't leave. Normally, a male lion would keep his distance from a newborn litter, occasionally checking in but mostly staying on patrol. But Kovu stayed close, sleeping beside the den entrance, pacing protectively anytime a vulture passed overhead or a hyena called from the distance. And he kept caring for the runt. The smallest cub, now affectionately nicknamed Tamu, which means sweet in Swahili, seemed to respond best when Kovu was nearby. If Kovu licked her, she'd move. If he nudged her with his nose, she'd squeak. No one could explain it, but the bond between them was undeniable. The sanctuary staff was in awe. Eli returned every day to check on the cubs, crouching near the den and taking notes. "I've never seen anything like this," he said to Zanil on the third morning. "It's like he understands she needs more help. Like he knows she won't make it without him." Zanil smiled faintly but didn't reply. Because something else was bothering her. A shadow approaches. Deep in the western territory of the sanctuary, something was moving. Something dangerous. A rogue male. He was called Roka, a massive lion displaced from his pride by younger challengers. Scarred and hungry, he had been drifting dangerously close to Kovu and Kiera's territory for weeks. The rangers had been tracking him quietly, hoping he'd wander back out. But 2 nights after the cubs were born, Roka crossed the invisible boundary. Zanil was the first to spot his fresh prints. She brought the evidence to Eli. "We have a problem," she said quietly, laying out her camera traps. Eli leaned forward. The footage showed Roka sniffing at the edges of the brush, close to the acacia den. Close enough to smell fresh blood. New life. And for a rogue male lion, that scent only meant one thing: a threat. "He's going to try and kill them, isn't he?" Eli asked grimly. Zanil nodded. "He's following instinct. If he takes over this pride, he'll want to kill the cubs to bring Kiera back into heat. That's how the wild works." Eli clenched his jaw. "But Kovu won't let him," he said. "He'll fight. And then more quietly, he'll die trying." The warning signs. Kovu was restless that evening. The sky turned a soft pink, casting long shadows across the golden grass. He paced more than usual. His ears twitched constantly. He sniffed the wind, low growls rumbling in his chest. Kiera stayed in the den, still recovering, nursing the cubs in shifts. Tamu was still weaker than her siblings, unable to fully stand. Eli had left behind rehydration formula just in case, But she hadn't needed it yet. Still, a storm was coming. And Kovu knew. Zanil stayed overnight in the observation post 300 yards from the den. The thermal camera flickered as a shape moved at the edge of the bush. It wasn't Kovu. Roka had arrived. The battle begins. At 3:47 a.m., the silence shattered. A roar tore across the savannah, sharp and primal. Zanil leapt from her cot, grabbing her binoculars. Through the lens, two golden shapes clashed just beyond the den. Kovu met Roka head-on. The fight was brutal. Thunderous snarls. Dust flying. Blood splattering. Kovu, though leaner, fought with something different. Something deeper than instinct. He fought with purpose. He wasn't defending territory. He was defending his family. Twice, Roka tried to break past him, heading for the den. Both times, Kovu lunged and dragged him down. They tumbled, claws ripping flesh, teeth snapping inches from vital organs. And finally, after nearly 40 minutes, Roka turned and fled, limping into the darkness. Zanil exhaled shakily. He did it, she whispered into her radio. He saved them. But Kovu paid the price. When the sun rose, Eli arrived to check on the aftermath. What he saw made his stomach turn. Kovu was bleeding badly. Deep gashes along his side, a torn ear, and a puncture wound near his back leg. He was limping, barely standing, but still refusing to lie down. He sat at the den's entrance, head high, defiant. He won't make it without treatment, Eli said quietly. We have to sedate him. We need to clean those wounds before infection sets in. But Zanil hesitated. If we sedate him, the den is vulnerable. If Roka comes back. Eli made a decision. Then I'll go in. I'll stay with Kiera and the cubs. I won't leave them alone. Zanil looked at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. But within the hour, they sedated Kovu, and Eli crawled into the den once more. This time not to help deliver life but to protect it. The longest night. That night was one of the hardest Eli had ever endured. The den was hot and crowded. Kiera was anxious with Kovu unconscious. The cubs mewed, sensing the shift. Tamu, especially, cried out, tiny paws searching for the warmth of the lion who had cared for her since the moment she was born. And outside, the sounds of the wild grew louder. Hyenas called in the distance. A leopard snarled. Every time a branch snapped or a bird startled, Kiera would growl low in her throat, muscles tensing. Eli kept a hand on her flank, speaking in soft whispers, trying to calm her. But nothing could stop the worry gnawing at him. Would Kovu wake up? And if he did, would he still be strong enough to lead? The awakening. At dawn, just as the first rays of light pierced the den entrance, a familiar low growl echoed across the grass. Kovu was standing. Still weak. Still limping. But alive. He walked slowly to the den, poking his head in. Tamu squeaked and began wriggling toward him. And in that moment, after blood, pain, and fire, Kovu stepped into the den and laid beside his family, wrapping his body protectively around them. Kiera rested her head on his shoulder. Tamu curled beneath his chest. And Eli quietly wept. News spreads across the globe. The sanctuary posted a second video, this time of the aftermath. The caption read, "A father's fight. Kovu stands between death and his cubs." The world watched, stunned, as a male lion did the unthinkable, defied natural order, risked his life, and nearly died not for territory but for love. It wasn't long before wildlife experts were commenting. This changes how we view male lion behavior. He's not just a protector, he's a parent. This kind of empathy, we didn't believe it existed in the wild. Some questioned whether Kovu was an outlier, a rare exception. Others believed he was proof that even in the animal kingdom bonds went deeper than survival. But for Eli there was no doubt. He chose them, he said simply during an interview. He chose to stay. He chose to fight. And he chose to love. But the peace wouldn't last. As Kovu healed and the cubs grew, a new danger emerged, one that no lion could fight with tooth and claw, one that threatened not just his family, but the future of the entire sanctuary. A decision would have to be made, and Kovu would again stand at the center of it. But this time he wouldn't be fighting another lion. He'd be facing humans. Kovu had faced down predators, fought for his cubs, and risked his life to protect his family, but nothing could have prepared him for the threat that came next. It wasn't another lion. It wasn't drought, disease, or hunger. It was humans. And the choice they made next nearly tore the sanctuary, and Kovu's world, apart. The recovery that sparked a storm. In the weeks following Kovu's bloody battle with Roka, the den transformed from a battleground into a nursery. Kiera regained her strength. The cubs began opening their eyes and venturing beyond the shadows of their sanctuary. Damn, the runt who had nearly died at birth, was the last to walk, her tiny paws wobbly beneath her. But when she finally stepped out of the den and nuzzled against her father's leg, the staff watching from afar cheered quietly through their tears. Zaniel and Eli had both started documenting everything. Daily logs, behavior charts, endless video clips. Kovu's interactions were unlike anything they'd ever seen, carrying cubs gently, grooming them one at a time, even curling up in a circle around them while they slept like a living fortress. "We're not watching a male lion," Eli whispered one evening. "We're watching a father. A real father." That phrase would go on to headline articles across conservation networks and wildlife blogs. The footage of Kovu's nurturing side went viral. But the attention wasn't just emotional, it was controversial. Because some people didn't believe what they were seeing. The email that sparked panic. 3 weeks after the fight, Eli received a short, cold email from the Botswana Wildlife Management Board. Subject: Behavioral Aberration and Genetic Risk Assessment, Zuberi Pride. Body: Recent footage of male lion Kovu suggests deviant behavioral patterns inconsistent with wild lion ecology. There is concern this behavior may be linked to sanctuary domestication, injury, or prior human exposure. A relocation request is under review. Please prepare the animal for potential transfer to Mokolodi Contained Facility for further evaluation. Department of Wildlife Oversight. Eli read it twice, then a third time. His stomach turned to stone. They wanted to remove Kovu. They saw his compassion not as progress, but as a problem. They believed it was a genetic risk, something that could weaken future lion behavior if passed down. In their eyes he was no longer wild. Eli slammed his hand against the desk. They're punishing him for loving his cubs. A hard choice. The next morning, a meeting was held inside the sanctuary's mission hut. Eli, Zaniel, and the board liaison sat in silence as the implications were laid out. "If the board enforces relocation," said the liaison, a stiff man in khakis with military posture, "he'll be sedated, transported, and isolated for observation. If his behavior continues, he may be deemed unfit for re-release." Zaniel was livid. "You're going to lock him in a cage? For being different? For not abandoning his children?" The liaison didn't flinch. "We can't allow behavioral outliers to shape dominant traits. Compassion in a predator is not adaptive in the wild. If his cubs inherit that trait, it could destabilize natural hierarchies." Eli stood slowly. Kovu didn't become weak. He became strong enough to protect the vulnerable. "You call it a threat? I call it evolution." But logic wasn't enough. A relocation order was drafted. They had 5 days. Desperate measures. That night Eli couldn't sleep. He walked the perimeter of the sanctuary, flashlight beams sweeping over acacia trunks and termite mounds, until he found himself near the den once more. Kovu was lying on a small rise beside Kiera, eyes half closed, tail flicking. The cubs were curled up together like a bundle of warm fur. Tamu was nestled closest to Kovu's chest, her tiny face buried in his mane. Eli crouched at a distance, heartbreaking. "They're going to take you away," he whispered into the darkness. "They think love is weakness." He pulled out his phone and started filming. No narration. Just the scene. The lion who had risked his life, now watching over his children beneath a star-filled sky. The next morning he uploaded it to the sanctuary's account with one line. "They're taking him away unless we stop them." A world united. Within hours the post went viral. Hashtags trended across the globe. Hashtag Save Kovu. Hashtag Lion Father. Hashtag Let Him Stay. Influencers, wildlife experts, even celebrities reposted it. Dr. Jenna Hughes, a world-renowned zoologist, published an op-ed. "We're witnessing evolution in real time. Emotional intelligence in wild species. Instead of fear, we should be studying Kovu, not isolating him." Petitions launched. Within 48 hours, over 1.2 million people signed demanding the Botswana Wildlife Board reverse its order. The pressure worked. The board issued a response. "We acknowledge the concerns raised regarding the relocation of lion specimen Kovu. A temporary suspension of the order is in place pending further behavioral studies." Eli laughed in disbelief when he read it. But the joy was short-lived. Because the board added something else. If Kovu shows signs of aggression, abnormality, or stress-related behavior, the order will be reinstated. Final observation phase, 14 days. The final test. For the next 2 weeks, cameras recorded every moment of Kovu's life. A team of silent observers camped nearby. Any slip, Any act of unpredictability could end his time with the pride. At first, Kovu was calm, until the helicopters arrived. A nearby fire had broken out in a neighboring reserve, and fire crews had mobilized by air. For the animals at Zubiri, the sound of whirring blades sent shockwaves through their instincts. Many ran. Some froze. And Kovu stood between the den and the sky. As one helicopter passed directly overhead, the cubs panicked, tumbling out of the brush in fear. Kiera roared. But it was Kovu who acted. He sprinted toward the cubs, grabbing two by the scruff, nudging the others forward with his massive head. All 5 were shepherded into the den in under 30 seconds. And then, the unthinkable. A fire line crossed into the sanctuary. Trial by fire. The team scrambled to respond, rushing to contain the edge flames. But smoke began billowing toward the dens. Animals fled. And Kovu? He didn't leave. He stayed inside the den, protecting them. Eli, choking on smoke, raced toward the site, screaming Kovu's name like he was calling a brother. And then, through the haze he saw them. All 6 lions emerging as one. Kovu in the lead, his mane singed, but his eyes burning with the same intensity that had driven him since the moment Kiera cried in labor. Eli collapsed to his knees. They made it, he sobbed. He saved them. Again. The verdict. 3 days later, the Wildlife Board sent its final decision. Following observed behavior during extreme environmental stress, Lion Kovu has demonstrated exceptional adaptive intelligence, protective instinct, and leadership. The board hereby recognizes his value as a behavioral outlier to be studied, not removed. Kovu will remain at Zubiri Sanctuary. His family will not be separated. Eli read the letter aloud in the field center. Zanil cried. So did the staff. But no one celebrated like the cubs. That night, Tamu crawled into her father's chest fur once more, and the family slept beneath the stars, whole. But far away in the shadows. Unbeknownst to the sanctuary, something was brewing in the far reaches of the savannah. Roka was back. And this time, he wasn't alone. Another pride. A coalition. And a mission. Kovu's family would soon face their greatest challenge yet. Not from nature. Not from man. But from the wild itself. Kovu had survived fire, man's judgment, and the threat of exile, but now something far more ancient loomed on the horizon. The wild had returned for him. A coalition of rogue males was closing in, and with them came a storm of violence and primal law. Would Kovu fight once more, or fall? What he did in the final moments would echo across generations, and leave the world in absolute awe. The signs were clear. 2 weeks after the fire, Zubiri Sanctuary was healing. Ash still marked the edges of the land, but green shoots had begun pushing through. The air smelled of rebirth. The cubs had grown stronger, playful now, often tumbling together near a patch of sun just outside their den. But Kovu was on edge. He paced more frequently. Marked territory aggressively. Roared each morning and again at dusk, sending his voice rolling across the savannah like thunder. Eli and Zanil knew what it meant. He senses them, Zanil murmured, staring through her binoculars. She didn't need to say who. Roka was back and not alone this time. Camera traps had captured them days earlier. 3 massive males moving like a unit, eyes focused, muscles lean. A coalition. They're not just passing through, Eli said. They're coming for the pride. Zanil nodded grimly. They'll challenge him. One by one or all at once. And if they win. She trailed off. They both knew what happened when a coalition overtook a pride. The cubs would be slaughtered. To wipe Kovu's bloodline from the land. Preparation for war. The sanctuary team went into emergency protocol. Observation huts were reinforced. Extra rangers were dispatched to monitor the perimeter. Drones were deployed to track the movement of the rogues. Meanwhile, Kovu continued to prepare in his own way. He led his family to a higher ground den, rockier, narrower, harder to reach. He patrolled twice as much. When the cubs strayed too far, he herded them back. When Kiera looked to him with weary eyes, he rested beside her, nuzzling her gently. It wasn't fear that drove him. It was focus. He knew this fight would be different. He was no longer defending just Kiera or a patch of earth. He was defending his cubs, his legacy, the invasion. It began at dawn. 3 roars pierced the air, one after the other. The rogues had entered the territory. Zanil's radio crackled to life. Visual confirmed. All 3. Eastern Ridge. Heading west toward the high ground den. Eli was already moving. We need to intervene. We can't let them. Zanil grabbed his arm. No. This is nature's call. If we interfere now, we compromise everything we've fought for. Eli looked at her, jaw clenched. But those cubs. Kovu knows what's coming. The stand. They arrived like thunder, Roka in front, older and more scarred than ever, flanked by two younger males with golden coats and eyes sharp as knives. Kovu stood alone at the base of the den rise. Behind him, Kiera and the cubs watched in still silence, their bodies pressed close together. Tmu whimpered softly, nuzzling her father's tail. Kovu didn't flinch. Not when Roka growled. Not when the other males circled. Not even when all three lunged at once. He fought like a lion possessed. Blood sprayed. Dust exploded. Roars echoed across the sanctuary. Kovu went down once, twice, but rose each time, his body cut, his muscles trembling. He took one of the younger rogues down hard, slamming him against the rocks with a brutal roar that made the birds take flight for miles. The second rogue hesitated, then fled. Only Roka remained. The final reckoning. The father versus the savage. Roka was larger, hungrier, and enraged. He struck fast, slashing across Kovu's face. Kovu responded by biting into Roka's shoulder, dragging him to the dirt. They rolled, teeth snapping inches from throats. Kiera stood ready to charge, but Zaniel, watching from a distance through a scope, whispered, "No, not yet." Eli's voice cracked. "Come on, Kovu. Come on." The final blow came not with force, but with fire in the heart. Roka lunged, and Kovu dodged just enough, then turned with a roar that was more than a sound. It was a declaration. He slammed into Roka's side, flipping him onto his back, then stood over him, teeth at his throat. Roka stilled. He knew it was over. And slowly, he limped away, defeated once and for all. The return to peace. Kovu didn't chase him. He returned to the den, limping, bleeding, but victorious. The cubs ran to him. Tmu reached him first, pressing her tiny head against his leg. He collapsed beside them, head resting gently near Kiera's paw. They were safe. They were whole. The world watched it all unfold, captured by drone, broadcast within hours across every major platform. The image of Kovu standing tall, bloodied but unbroken, with his cubs behind him, became the symbol of something no one could deny any longer. Fatherhood is not weakness. Compassion is not a flaw. And Kovu was not an exception. He was evolution. A new era begins. 6 months later, the cubs were healthy and strong. Tmu, once the runt, now led her siblings in mock hunts across the tall grass. Kiera rested more often, letting Kovu take lead. Eli stood at the edge of the den hill one morning, arms crossed, watching Kovu move through his territory like a king born of fire and love. Zaniel approached quietly. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "And I keep wondering, what if we had taken him away?" Zaniel looked down at the family below. Then the world would have lost its greatest teacher. The legacy of Kovu. The sanctuary released a full-length documentary, Kovu, the Lion Who Loved. It broke viewership records for wildlife content. Schools adopted it into curricula. Wildlife boards reconsidered male lion behavior frameworks. Donations poured into Zuberi, enough to expand the sanctuary, ensuring no family would ever be torn apart again by policy or fear. But beyond the data, beyond the views, beyond the fame, Kovu remained the same. He was a lion. A warrior. A protector. And every night, he curled up beside Kiera, 5 cubs snuggled against him, and watched the stars above the land he defended with everything in him. Years later, tourists lucky enough to visit Zuberi would sometimes see a breathtaking sight. A fully grown lioness, sleek and proud, standing beside an older male with a silver mane and deep golden eyes. Around them, a new generation of cubs played in the grass. Rangers would whisper to the visitors, "That's Tmu the runt." And beside her, "That's Kovu. Still watching. Still loving. Still leading." And sometimes, just sometimes, those guests would hear the distant echo of a lion's roar, rolling across the plains not as a threat, but as a promise. A promise that love is the fiercest power of all.